Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when no one had a smartphone, a smartwatch, or even a wall clock, and yet, people still had to wake up on time. You'll step into the dusty, incense-scented streets of the Ottoman Empire, where the first thing to wake you isn't a chime or a buzz, it's the human voice calling you to prayer from the minaret. And if you think your 7 a.m. alarm is harsh, imagine getting roused by a stranger shouting at you from a tower. In Arabic, while pigeons flap past your window. Tonight's journey isn't thrilling, dangerous, or even remotely efficient. You'll be trudging through a world where on time was more of a suggestion, and the consequences of oversleeping ranged from missing prayer to disappointing the Sultan, which, spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing bedtime around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink awake, groggy, wrapped in layers of linen, the faint clove-scented air already whispering through your chamber. Somewhere out there, a minaret croaks to life, and the first muezzin of the day begins the adhan, the Islamic call to prayer, his voice weaving through still sleepy birds and half-shuttered stalls. It's early, pre-dawn, and the city of Istanbul is only just beginning to stretch. But even now, in this moment of hushed gold light and cracked silence, time is in motion. You sit up, rub your eyes, and realize something quietly horrifying. You're late. Again. Not by hours, but by enough that it matters. You were meant to light the morning incense before the prayer call, a small responsibility in the palace compound, but still, the kind that earns sharp looks and cold breakfasts when skipped. You scramble out of bed, hurriedly wrap your sash, and tug your sandals on with the kind of precision that only comes after a month of slipping them on backward. The cobbled streets are still damp with dew. The mosque domes glow silver in the pre-sunrise haze. The muezzin's voice continues, echoing gently through the alleys, guiding hundreds, if not thousands, toward morning prayer. And you wonder, again, why hasn't someone invented a better way to wake up? Because this, relying on human lungs and guesswork, isn't exactly foolproof. Mainstream historical fact? For centuries, the Islamic world used muezzins to keep prayer time, long before mechanical clocks were widespread. These professional callers relied on visual cues, twilight, shadows, and even the height of the sun to determine the right moments. But accuracy? Let's say it had range. Some scholars still argue whether the earliest calls were precisely timed or just best guesses based on probably the right amount of light. And in an empire spanning from North Africa to Central Asia, probably doesn't mean the same thing in Cairo as it does in Aleppo. You reach your small station by the outer courtyard, too late for incense, but just in time to look mildly busy as the Janissaries march past. One gives you a look. Not angry. Just disappointed. Somehow, that's worse. You bow, mumble something about ash in your sandals, and promise yourself this will be the last time you oversleep. Of course, you've said that before. You aren't the only one struggling with timeliness. The whole empire does. Across town, bakers are underbaking loaves because their firekeeper fell asleep. Scholars miss dawn lectures. Soldiers show up for drills a beat too slow. The problem isn't laziness. It's time itself, slippery, inconsistent, and measured by people instead of machines. And the Sultan? Well, he's annoyed. Not publicly, of course. He's far too regal for that. But quietly, there are rumors. Frustrated murmurs about missed meetings, slow parades, and sleepy courtiers shuffling into chambers with damp turbans and half-tied belts. Apparently, even imperial robes can't hide bedhead. The palace astrologers have suggested adjustments. The court scholars have proposed lunar-based timetables. One poet suggested replacing prayer with naps, which got him reassigned to counting fish at the docks. But the core issue remains: no one wakes up on time. Fringe historical tidbit? In the 1500s, there were entire neighborhoods where time was kept by the loudest neighbor with the best view of the sky. If you're upstairs and had strong lungs and a clear line to the horizon, she unofficially became the alarm system. These people were called Iodicalderandler, literally, those who get you on your feet. Not everyone appreciated their efforts. You, however, have a different plan. As you slump on the incense bench, mentally promising to ask the mosque timekeeper for shadow reading lessons, a question sneaks into your mind. What if time could wake itself up? A device, maybe. One that doesn't rely on voice or sun or memory. Something that ticks. Or hums. Or breathes fire, though that last bit might be a stretch. Still, something. The idea tickles you awake. You shake off the last of your sleep, sit a little straighter, and wonder, what if the empire needs a new kind of morning? One that doesn't forget. One that doesn't oversleep. One that doesn't yell. A clock, maybe. But with teeth. You shuffle back through the narrow alleys of the palace compound, eyes adjusting to the hazy pink of early morning. Someone has already begun boiling lentils in the kitchens, and the scent winds through the air like a sleepy handshake. You dodge a goat with far too much confidence and sidestep a laundry line that definitely wasn't there yesterday. Your mind, however, is somewhere entirely different. Because now, all you can think about is the Sultan's grumbling. It's not official, of course. You're not privy to court whispers. You're not even important enough to pour tea for someone who is. But even so, the rumors drift. They say His Imperial Majesty, Defender of the Faith, Shadow of God on Earth, Master of 3 continents, is tired of being late to his own meetings. Apparently, the astrologers forgot to remind him of a ceremony. Or maybe the call to prayer was a few minutes off and set his entire morning spiraling. Or perhaps he's just bored. You know how rulers get when they've already conquered everything and the soup shows up lukewarm. Whatever the reason, the court is tense. And that tension, like perfume in a silk pouch, leaks out into the wider city. You pass the old candle maker. He's lighting his wares with hands that shake just slightly. Miss Far again, he mutters to himself. Sultan will boil us all in rosewater if this keeps up. It's clearly a joke. Probably. Mainstream fact? The Sultan's daily schedule was tightly packed: prayer, petitions, council meetings, processions, military briefings, diplomacy over lunch, poetry in the afternoon, and a solid 3 hours of watching fountains just because he could. If the schedule fell behind, hundreds of people were inconvenienced. And occasionally, imprisoned. So you can imagine how much weight sat on the shoulders of a single muezzin who might have had a head cold that day. Historians still argue whether the Sultan actually ever scolded the timekeepers or if the fear of disappointing him was simply baked into the bureaucracy. Either way, no one wanted to be the reason he squinted disapprovingly at the hourglass. You pass by the Tower of Justice, the highest building in the palace. A few servants glance up nervously, half expecting someone to be tossed from it for being 5 minutes late. You try not to look up. Instead, you glance toward the quiet annex where the court scholars live and work. Dozens of men with long beards and tired eyes, muttering to themselves about celestial alignments and mechanical ratios. You used to think they were just eccentric. Now, you suspect they might be onto something. There's a rumor, an old one, that one of the Sultan's great-great-grandfathers had commissioned a mechanical lion that roared at noon. It supposedly frightened an entire embassy from Venice into giving better trade terms. Fringe tidbit? A different account claims the lion sneezed instead of roaring, thanks to a faulty bellows system, and sprayed wine on a priceless rug. Historians still argue whether this was an accident or a performance piece. But the point is, machines can do things. What if one could wake people up? You pass through the open court where the Janissaries are already practicing drills. Blades gleam in the morning sun. Commands echo sharply. No one here looks like they've ever overslept in their life. You mutter under your breath, "Must be nice." One of them glares at you. You keep walking. Eventually, you reach the small alcove where the muwakkil, the palace timekeeper, keeps his tools. You knock gently. A few heartbeats pass before the screen slides open just enough to reveal a weary eye, bushy eyebrow, and a distinct smell of ink and garlic. "What?" he grunts. You bow. Not too deep. Just enough to seem polite without looking desperate. "I was wondering," you say, "if I might learn how to tell time better." A pause. He squints at you like you've asked how to milk a serpent. "Why?" "I overslept." "Congratulations." You wait, resisting the urge to explain your dreams of mechanized mornings and the faint idea forming in your head involving pulleys, a candle, and maybe a rope tied to your ankle. Instead, you just say, "I want to help the Empire." He snorts. "Get in line." Still, after a moment, he opens the screen wider. Inside, the room smells of dried citrus, beeswax, and time itself. Scrolls hang from the rafters. A bronze astrolabe rests on a velvet cushion. There's an hourglass turned upside down, and a water clock made of porcelain, with spouts shaped like dragon heads. It's not the future. But it's close. Mainstream fact, Ottoman muwakkils were trained in astronomy and mathematics. Their job wasn't just to keep time, it was to determine the right time for religious obligations, fasting, and even political decisions. They were part scientist, part priest, and part weather forecaster. And they weren't particularly fond of interruptions. You step carefully over a rolled rug and sit cross-legged on the floor, hands in your lap, eyes scanning the chaotic order of instruments and diagrams. You know, the muwakkil says after a while, there was a man once, years ago, who claimed he could build a device that woke people up. You perk up. He attached a candle to a thread, tied it to a bell, and timed the burn. Your mouth opens. That man, he adds, set fire to his own mustache. Fringe tidbit? Candle-based alarm clocks actually existed in multiple cultures, including China and parts of medieval Europe. They burned predictably, triggering mechanisms or simply dropping small objects at timed intervals. But they were also, famously, fire hazards. Historians still debate whether these devices were more practical or theatrical. You nod solemnly. "I'll be careful." The muwakkil grunts again and hands you a small booklet, its cover made of pressed papyrus and stitched with red thread. "Study this," he says. "Then we'll talk." You thank him, bow again, and back away carefully, not because of reverence, but because there's a scorpion curled asleep in the corner and you don't want to wake it. You return to your bench by the incense burner. Open the booklet. And begin to read. The first line? "Time is a river with no banks." You sigh. It's going to be a long afternoon. You flip the booklet open again, rubbing sleep from your eyes as the early sun climbs lazily over the dome of the Topkapi Palace. The pages are packed with tightly spaced lines of Arabic script, calligraphed so precisely that they make your own handwriting look like it was done by a dizzy camel. Diagrams snake through the margins, sundials, star charts, even what looks like a bird tied to a string. You blink again. Nope, definitely a bird tied to a string. This is your first true step into the strange, meticulous, and, let's be honest, painfully slow world of Ottoman timekeeping. You start with shadow lengths. The angle of the sun. The importance of knowing when the third shadow after sunrise hits the corner of a particular tile. All very precise. All completely unhelpful when clouds roll in. And then, buried halfway through the second section, you find a line underlined in faded red ink. Time is not made by clocks. Time is made by watchers. That's you now. A watcher. Congratulations. You've joined the ranks of the empire's human alarm clocks. Mainstream fact? Before mechanical timekeeping became widespread, the Islamic world depended on specially trained timekeepers, muwakkits, who used the stars, the sun, and keen observation to track the hours. Their main duty? Making sure the 5 daily prayers happen at the right time, down to the minute. Which is hard when your only tools are a stick and a good memory. You shuffle through the palace garden to the east wall, where the training begins. Your mentor, yes, the garlic-scented muwakkit from earlier, is already there, squinting into the rising sun like he's reading something you'll never quite understand. Shadows 2 fingers long, he says without looking. 3rd hour after sunrise. Give or take. You look. You squint. You try to see it. It just looks shadowy, you mumble. Exactly, he replies, completely unhelpfully. The next few days pass in a blur of sunburns, bad guesses, and a surprising number of arguments about the correct height of a minaret's shadow. You learn how to chart time based on how fast incense burns, how to set water clocks without spilling them too much, and how to tell when noon arrives based on the light through a specific crack in a specific pillar on the 3rd floor of the royal bathhouse. Yes, really. Fringe tidbit? One Ottoman palace had a mosaic on the ground designed to reflect sunlight only during certain hours of the day, acting like a primitive watch face. But only when the weather cooperated and no one accidentally dropped fruit on it. Which happened. Often. And still, despite all this elaborate measuring, you're late again. It's not your fault. A pigeon knocked over the incense clock. But try explaining that to a vizier with zero sense of humor and an urgent appointment with the Sultan. You bow, apologize, and prepare for yet another scolding, but instead, the vizier simply sighs. Get a rooster next time, he mutters, sweeping past you in a cloud of frankincense and frustration. A rooster. Huh. You return to the courtyard and plop down beside the sundial. The muwakkit is already drawing a new diagram in the dirt with a stick. You gesture to the diagram. Is that a plan for a clock? He looks up. Smirks. That's a cat I once knew. You blink. He chuckles. Relax, he says. Clocks come later. For now, you learn the signs. And you do. Slowly. You begin to see time. You spot how the light bends at noon. How shadows shrink and grow like breathing creatures. How the tone of the muezzin's voice changes slightly depending on the angle of the tower's wind. You start waking up before the adhan. Just a few minutes early at first. Then more. Until one day, you wake up entirely on your own, stretch, and realize. You've become the human alarm. You walk to the rooftop, just before the sun rises, and call out the time. 2 servants stir. A cook nods from the garden. The muwakkil hears you and gives the faintest approving grunt. And somewhere, far across the compound, the Sultan's coffee is poured right on schedule. Historians still argue whether palace timekeepers were given actual influence or just ceremonial respect. Some accounts say they advised the court. Others say they were just there to light lanterns and not knock things over. Probably both. Probably depending on who was sultan that week. You begin drafting diagrams of your own now. Little sketches of bells tied to ropes. Of candles with lines marked on them. Of pulleys and balance weights and gently menacing metal birds. It's mostly nonsense. But it's your nonsense. And you start to wonder, if time can be watched, can it be caught? You imagine a box. Inside it, gears turn. A wheel ticks forward. And at the right moment, ping, something happens. Not a shout. Not a call. Just a sound. A small, dependable sound. A sound that wakes you up before the vizier arrives with that look again. You don't have the parts yet. You don't have the skill. But the idea is in your head now. Nestled there like a bird in a lantern, waiting to stretch its wings. And just like that, you become something even stranger than a timekeeper. You become an inventor. You're starting to think in wheels now. Gears. Springs. Ropes and weights. Every time you blink, you imagine mechanisms whirring in the shadows. Your dreams have gone mechanical too. Last night you dreamed a rooster pulled a lever and launched a muezzin into the sky. Possibly symbolic. Possibly breakfast related. Still, one thing is clear, watching time is no longer enough. You want to measure it. Control it. Maybe even boss it around a little. Of course, you're not the first. Timekeeping has always been part science, part stubborn optimism. Long before your little diagrams and sleep-deprived theories, other cultures were trying, and mostly failing, to tame the beast. So your mentor gives you homework. Go visit the merchants, he says, waving vaguely toward the bazaar. Look for water clocks. Candle timers. Shadow toys. Anything with moving parts. Ask stupid questions. You're good at that. And so you go. The Grand Bazaar is already humming by mid-morning. Hundreds of stalls packed with everything from carpets to spices to small glass birds that chirp when heated by the sun. It's loud, it's chaotic, and it smells like saffron got into a fistfight with rosewater. You dodge a donkey, trip over a carpet merchant's footstool, and finally find what you're looking for, a small, shadowy booth tucked between a jeweler and a coffee vendor, its shelves packed with the mechanical ancestors of modern chaos. Mainstream fact? By the 17th century, the Islamic world had a long history of ingenious timekeeping devices, from water clocks used in mosques to intricate astrolabes for celestial tracking. Many of these inventions predated or rivaled similar developments in Europe and China. The shopkeeper eyes you suspiciously. You look like you slept in a fountain, he says. I did, you reply. But I'm here for clocks. He perks up. Ah, he says. Then you want to see the shelf. The shelf is exactly what it sounds like, a dusty wooden plank holding an unpredictable variety of ticking, dripping, swinging things. There's a clepsydra, a water clock, made from a copper bowl with a slow drip and etched hour lines. There's a candle clock, marked with metal pins that fall at timed intervals and hit a gong. You watch it for a full 10 minutes until one finally dings and startles you into dropping a bag of dates. You apologize. The vendor waves you closer. Then he shows you the prize, an elephant clock, well, a miniature version, designed by the great engineer Al-Jazari centuries earlier. It's a marvel of weighted systems and clever channels, designed to tell the time through a procession of shifting figures. The original had birds, dragons, and even a scribbling scribe. Yours has a slightly judgmental owl and a turtle with a bell. Fringe tidbit? Al-Jazari's elephant clock, from the 13th century, was an early attempt to create a universal timepiece, blending Indian, Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Chinese design elements. Historians still argue whether it actually worked perfectly or was more symbolic than functional. Either way, it definitely had style. You lean in. Does it still tick? The vendor shrugs. On Thursdays, you spend the next 2 hours pestering every merchant who deals in time-related goods. You ask about sundials shaped like camels, incense sticks measured for prayer times, and a strange Persian contraption that involves a cat, a flame, and what you think might be a potato. You leave with ink-stained hands, 3 new sketches, and a bruised shin from an overly enthusiastic merchant demonstrating a swinging pendulum. You return to your little bench by the palace garden, heart buzzing, eyes wide. The muwakkil watches you drop your bundle of notes and diagrams and says, "You look like someone who just discovered fire, then immediately burned their eyebrows off." "Better," you reply. "I discovered elephants that tell time." You spend that afternoon rearranging your sketches. You begin to see patterns. Pulleys rely on weight. Gears need balance. Water moves predictably, so does wax, and sand, and certain types of very angry roosters. But something's missing. You don't want just a device that marks time. You want something that acts at the right time. Something that does something. You want the first Ottoman alarm. The muwakkil leans over your shoulder and taps one of your scribbles. "What's that?" You beam. It's a bell. Attached to a spool. Tied to a candle. He raises an eyebrow. And when the candle burns down, it snaps the thread, which pulls the bell, and wakes the person up. There's a pause. He nods. Then says, "And if the person is hard of hearing?" Then it also drops a book on their head. He actually chuckles at that. Historians still argue whether devices like these were ever common, or if they were mostly novelties kept by scholars and eccentric court officials. Evidence is scarce, and many such inventions were likely homemade, undocumented, or accidentally set on fire. Still, you feel something shifting. You're not just a human alarm clock anymore. You're a student of machines. Of balance. Of motion. You lie awake that night listening to the quiet rhythm of the palace. Distant footsteps. The creak of wooden beams. Somewhere, a cat yells at the moon. And in your mind, gears click into place. Not real ones. Not yet. But the idea, the machine, is growing. A machine that doesn't need shadows or memory. A machine that wakes the empire before the sultan misses his tea again. A machine that tells time not by watching, but by doing. You wake before dawn, no rooster, no incense, no adhan. Just instinct. Or maybe it's the excitement. Your mind is already halfway down the palace corridor, fingers twitching with anticipation. Because today, you're going to build something. Well, sort of. First, you need permission. It turns out you can't just walk into the palace workshop and start melting bronze and tying bells to candles. Not unless you're a scribe, an artisan, or a royal pest. You're not the first two. But the third? You're getting better at that every day. You dress quickly and head to the imperial artisan's court, a sun-drenched corner of the palace where calligraphers, woodworkers, and clockmakers gather like slightly grumpy peacocks. The smell of lacquer and oil hangs heavy in the air. You find the chief clockmaker hunched over a desk, surrounded by half-assembled gears and the kind of concentrated silence that suggests one wrong word will get you throttled with a wrench. Mainstream fact? Ottoman clockmakers were not just artisans, they were engineers, philosophers, and time-obsessed nerds centuries before it was cool. Their work blended Islamic astronomical tradition with European mechanics, especially after the empire began importing complex clocks from Venice, Florence, and later, Paris. You clear your throat. Master, I seek to build a device. He doesn't look up. I'm very busy. I believe it could wake the Sultan. Now he looks up. Slowly. One eyebrow raised like a guillotine. I mean, gently. He sets down his tiny chisel and folds his arms. What kind of device? You pull out your crumpled sketches, bells, pulleys, candles, water drips, even a rudimentary balance weight shaped like a camel for reasons you no longer remember. He studies them in silence. Then, this will fall over. I'll add a base. This will catch fire. I'll use less wax. This is a chicken. You look. Oh. Yes. That was breakfast. Wrong page. Fringe tidbit? The Ottoman court kept mechanical automata, including peacocks that bowed, fountains that played musical notes, and even a perpetual motion drinking servant who was powered by cleverly concealed gears. These were less about function and more about spectacle, intended to awe foreign guests and confuse pigeons. After a long pause, the clockmaker sighs. Use the empty table in the back, he says, pointing toward a cluttered corner. Don't touch anything worth more than you. Define worth. He growls. You retreat gratefully. Your new workspace is modest, one creaky table, a stool with 3 legs, and no intention of growing a fourth, and a drawer full of bent tools and clock guts that look vaguely resentful. But to you, it's perfect. You begin by assembling a simple candle alarm. The idea is straightforward. The candle burns down, reaches a tied string, which snaps and releases a small hanging bell. Timing is dictated by the candle's thickness and the burn rate, 2 things you definitely haven't measured correctly yet. Your first test ends in disaster. The string doesn't snap. Instead, it sags. The bell slides gently down and comes to rest on your toe. No sound. Just shame. The clockmaker watches from a distance, then returns to his work without a word. You think you catch him smiling, but it could have been indigestion. You try again. This time, the string snaps too early. The bell clangs at random, startling a calligrapher into smudging his entire page of imperial poetry. He glares at you. You bow. Very low. Very sorry. Historians still argue whether candle clocks were ever truly accurate or just a creative approximation used in settings where actual time precision wasn't critical. There are references to monks and scholars using them to time rituals, but rarely to wake up emperors. You adjust the weight. Add a balance pin. 3rd time's the charm? Sort of. The bell finally rings close to the right moment. It's loud. Unpleasantly so. You jump. The workshop cat jumps. A nearby pot of paint jumps, then tips, and now the floor has a permanent turquoise reminder of your success. You spend the next hour cleaning, mumbling apologies, and secretly taking notes. Because despite the mess, despite the chaos, it worked. You keep refining. By mid-afternoon, you've cobbled together something you're willing to call your prototype, a wax-timed bell system, reinforced with a tiny balance weight and a backup string in case the first one melts too fast. You decide to test it tonight. in your own chamber, just in case it explodes. You light the candle. Check the string. Prop the bell carefully above your pillow. Then you lie back, heart pounding, eyes flickering in the candlelight. You wait. And wait. And just as you begin drifting off, somewhere between dreams of elephant clocks and whispering gears. Cling! It works. Not with elegance. Not quietly. But it works. You sit up, victorious, hair wildly askew, pillow askewer, eyes gleaming in the dark. You have done it. You've built the Ottoman Empire's first homemade alarm clock. And yes, it nearly blinded you with wax. But it's a start. You rush to the palace garden the next morning, waving the prototype like a victory banner. The muwakkil nods, clearly torn between admiration and concern. If that wakes the Sultan, he says, you'll either be promoted or exiled. Better than being late, you reply. And for the first time in weeks, you watch the sunrise without dread. Just anticipation. The next morning, your candle bell contraption sits proudly on your bench, gently scorched and slightly crooked. The wax puddle from last night still clings to the base like it's trying to hold on to its moment of fame. But none of that matters. Because it worked. For the first time in your very short but highly experimental career, you woke up before the adhan. You practically skipped to the artisan court, arms full of notes, eager to share your triumph. The master clockmaker glances at your waxy hands and soot-smudged tunic and groans into his tea. So you survived the night, he mutters. Shame. But he gestures to the same rickety work table, which, in his world, is practically a standing ovation. You get back to it. Now, it's not just about a device, it's about refining it, enhancing it, imagining what it could become. You're beginning to dream of a clock that doesn't just wake one person, but can signal a room or even an entire wing of the palace. Something that could, perhaps, wake the Janissaries without risking another shouted curse. Or perhaps something gentler, more elegant. A time fountain bell? A set-release candle timer? You write it all down. Mainstream fact? The Ottomans were deeply invested in water-based mechanisms. From fountains that played music to automata triggered by water flow, engineers in the empire used hydrodynamics not just for function but for beauty. The Topkapi Palace itself boasted intricate fountain systems and even hidden water organs in the gardens. Your mentor peers over your shoulder. Why do all your designs include birds? They're graceful, you say. And messy. You're not deterred. If birds can deliver messages across continents, surely one can flap its wooden wings when it's time for tea. You return to the bazaar in search of parts, thin wires, tiny bells, bits of polished metal. One merchant tries to sell you a piece of a Venetian pocket watch, which you're 90% sure is just a shiny button. Still, it's pretty, so you keep it. And then you find it, a glass tube, filled with colored oil, resting in a wooden frame. What does this do, you ask? The vendor shrugs. It tells time. Or, how hot it is. Depends who you ask. Fringe tidbit? Fluid-based thermoscopes, early versions of thermometers, were sometimes mistaken for timekeeping devices. Some inventors even tried to use heat-based expansion as a way to measure time, though success was variable. Historians still argue whether these hybrid instruments ever functioned reliably in daily life or were mostly speculative gadgets. You take it anyway. Back at the palace, you begin building your second prototype. This time, instead of a candle, you use dripping water. A tiny ceramic bowl with a pinhole in the bottom drains into a smaller cup. When the second cup fills, its weight tips a balance and triggers a chime. It's delicate, and slow, and leaks, but it's also peaceful. You test it in the courtyard under the watchful eye of a gardener trimming fig trees. After 27 minutes of tense silence, a faint ding sounds from your bell. The gardener claps politely. You beam. But then, disaster. The palace cat, your old nemesis, saunters over and drinks from the water bowl mid-test, throwing off the entire system and causing the cup to tip early. The bell rings twice. The gardener frowns. The cat stares at you, smug. You sigh and mark anti-cat protection in your notebook. Later that evening, you sketch late into the night, candle flickering low beside you. You try to merge the best parts of both systems, candle and water. Maybe even include that thermoscope somehow. The idea of a multifunctional device starts to take shape. It's part timekeeper, part art. And you're not alone in your obsession. You learn from one of the court scribes that a famed mechanical engineer from Damascus once created a nighttime prayer reminder using falling marbles and pressure plates. Apparently, it worked so well the Sultan had it moved into his bedroom, until it malfunctioned and dumped 24 marbles onto his sleeping face. Historians still debate whether that story is true or just an elaborate joke passed around among court servants. But either way, it's a good reminder. Precision matters. So you return to the Muwakkit with your progress. He listens patiently, fingers steepled beneath his chin. You're not bad at this, he says finally. You try not to beam too hard. But until you make something that works without supervision, he adds, it's just a toy. That stings a little. But he's right. So you go back to the drawing board. This time with durability in mind. No open flames near cloth. No leaking bowls. No easily disturbed cat-accessible elements. It takes 2 weeks. You rebuild your base. Add guards around the candle. A backup bell just in case. Even a rudimentary reset lever, basically a string you can pull to rewind the whole thing without taking it apart. You test it daily. Tweak the angles. Adjust the wax thickness. Weight the bells slightly with a coin for a louder ring. And then finally, one golden afternoon, it all comes together. Your third prototype sits on the workbench, gleaming with pride and a little polish. A candle slowly burns. The string tightens. You sit beside it, sipping weak coffee, waiting. 10 minutes. 20. 30. And then... cling! Not too early. Not too late. Just right. Even the workshop cat purrs in approval. You've done it. Not a perfect machine, but a reliable one. And in the land of silk robes and unpredictable desires, that might be the most magical invention of all. You've officially joined the club. Not the guild, not the court, and definitely not the scribes who don't set themselves on fire society, but the much smaller, far weirder fellowship of people who built a working Ottoman alarm clock. Membership, you. Dress code, soot-stained sleeves and wax in your hair. Your fourth prototype stands on the workshop bench now, sturdier, more balanced, and significantly less likely to tip over if sneezed at. But this time, your goal isn't just a single bell, or a splash of water, or a startled yell from the cat. This time, you want to wake the whole palace. Okay, maybe not everyone, you'd rather not end up chased by janissaries in their underpants, but at least a wider area. Enough to be useful. Enough that someone, somewhere, will stop calling your device that noisy toy. You begin with a question. How far can sound travel in a stone corridor? You wander the palace tapping bowls with spoons, ringing bells at different corners, counting echoes. One janitor thinks you're summoning spirits. Another offers you a bigger spoon. You take it gratefully. Mainstream fact? In pre-modern palaces like Topkapi, architecture often served functional purposes beyond aesthetics. Long corridors and tiled surfaces could carry voices, or alarms, further, which was useful for summoning servants or coordinating the muezzin's calls from remote minarets. You spend the next few days redesigning your bell system. This one includes a series of tin discs suspended from a wooden arm. When the main candle burns through its thread, it drops a weighted ball, which rolls down a small ramp, hits a lever, and releases the clapper arm, clink, 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 like a polite, metallic peacock in full warning mode. Your test audience? 3 servants, a bored janissary, and the cat. Results? The cat bolts. The janissary flinches. One servant drops a tray of dates. You consider it a complete success. Encouraged, you polish the wood, retune the bells, and add a splash of blue paint just for flair. It's starting to feel like a real invention now, not just a project. Something that might belong in the palace. You even give it a name, the Sesi Satsi, the sound timer. Fringe tidbit? While the Ottoman Empire adopted European-style mechanical clocks in later centuries, earlier inventions often had poetic or whimsical names. One 16th century scholar reportedly referred to his sundial as the shadow tamer. Others describe time as the lion in the mirror, a creature visible, powerful, and always slipping away. You show your finished design to the master clockmaker. He peers at it, taps it gently, listens to the clinks, then grunts. Won't last in humidity. I'll coat it. Wood's cheap. It's elegantly cheap. Still just a bell. But it's a sequence of bells. He shrugs. Still loud. I want it loud. A pause. Then he leans in, drops his voice, and asks, "Can you make one that's quiet? Just for me?" You blink. You want a silent alarm? He nods. Something that nudges you awake without waking your assistant. You look down at your contraption. All clanks and clangs and rolling weights. Then up at the rows of tiny gears lining the workbench. A new idea creeps in. Why not? Why not create an alarm that's not sound-based at all? You spend that night sketching, a small spring-loaded feather that brushes your cheek, a candle that tilts and drops a tiny sachet of pepper beside your nose, a wax-warm scent bellows that puffs rosewater under your pillow. Half of them are impractical. One nearly sneezes itself into pieces. But you're hooked again. You return the next morning with a new plan, the whisper clock. It's modest. A small candle warms a thin copper plate, which loosens a coil, which tips a feather gently downward at a set hour. Not loud. Not obvious. Just enough of a tickle to stir the lightest sleeper. Testing is awkward. You lie down on a bench in the workshop, feather poised above your nose. 1 hour passes. Then 2. The master clockmaker kicks your foot. You're snoring. You jolt up. The feather has already fallen, unnoticed. Maybe, a firmer feather, you offer weakly. He chuckles. But despite the failure, the idea sticks. Historians still argue whether personal time devices existed in the Ottoman Empire before imported pocket watches became common. While there's evidence of small, custom devices among the elite, most people still relied on call to prayer, public clocks, or sheer habit. You now have 2 projects. One loud. One quiet. Both ridiculous. But both with potential. You spend your days refining, tweaking, accidentally gluing your elbow to the bench. The palace starts to notice. One morning, you catch a janissary pointing at your sound timer with what can only be described as reluctant respect. A court musician asks if you can tune the bells to a scale. Even the muwakkik gives you a passing nod and mutters, "Better than a chicken, I suppose." Your mentor, meanwhile, is pretending none of this impresses him. But you catch him sketching something suspiciously similar to your candle drop mechanism on the corner of a prayer schedule. You grin. Because what began as a slightly charred wax accident is now shaping into something real. Functional. Even admired. And one day soon, when your clock wakes the palace on time, without drama, without yelling, you'll know. The Empire's mornings will have a new sound. And that sound will be yours. Your tools are no longer just borrowed scraps. You now have a dedicated box, well, more of a basket, that contains carefully wrapped twine, polished weights, wax of varying densities, a surprisingly judgmental goose feather, and what you swear is a perfectly balanced spoon. You've stopped explaining that last one to people. If they don't understand, they're not part of the movement. The Ottoman alarm clock revolution, that is. Because word's spreading. Your Sesi Satsi has become something of a novelty around the palace. Not official. Not celebrated. But definitely whispered about in those awkward hallways where nothing official ever happens. You overhear a vizier ask about the bellboy. He's not talking about a servant. You decide it's time to go public. Or at least, to host your own demonstration. You pick a quiet morning. Weather? Crisp. Breeze? Slightly smug. Your audience? A reluctant crowd of scribes, 3 palace guards, 1 confused herbalist, and the court's chief scheduler, who looks like she hasn't slept since the siege of Rhodes. Mainstream fact? By the 17th century, the Ottoman bureaucracy had become incredibly complex. Dozens of officials, many with near-identical titles, managed everything from the Sultan's itinerary to the palace laundry schedule. Timing was essential. So was managing the egos of men who believed time should wait for them. You set up the demonstration near a fountain, somewhere picturesque, but also not flammable. You wind the weights. You light the candle. You smile nervously and say, in 22 minutes, this device will announce the changing of the hour. The scheduler narrows her eyes. And if it doesn't? Then I'll personally organize the library scrolls by smell. She doesn't smile. You all wait. A single water drop echoes from the fountain. The breeze rustles your notes. 21 minutes and 40 seconds. Then, clink clink. The bell rings once. Then twice. Followed by the smooth, controlled descent of the weight. The sound bounces beautifully off the marble walls. A small bird flutters nearby and gives what you swear is a nod of approval. The scheduler blinks. Then, with the slow, deliberate motion of someone who makes or breaks entire weeks, she says, "Repeatable?" You nod. Quiet enough for dawn? You nod again. She turns to leave. But just before she disappears into the corridor, she tosses back, "Make one for the baths." Steam schedule's been a nightmare. You fall to your knees in relief. Fringe tidbit? The Ottoman baths, hammams, operated on tight schedules to accommodate religious rituals, gendered shifts, and even diplomacy. In some elite hammams, specific rooms were heated or cooled at intervals, making consistent timekeeping a weirdly crucial part of not accidentally roasting an ambassador. You go back to the workshop, glowing like freshly polished brass. The clockmaker watches you float past. Scheduler, eh? You nod proudly. He squints at your blueprint. She'll want it waterproof. Your face falls. Water. Heat. Steam. You're back to the drawing board. You spend the next 3 nights building Hammam Model 1. It's entirely sealed. No candles, only a water drip. Copper weights. A floating cork alarm that nudges open a shell bell when the water rises to a precise level. You test it in your own bath. It sinks. You try again. It tips. Third time, it works. Until a curious duck mistakes the cork alarm for food and bites it. Historians still argue whether devices like water clocks were ever common in Ottoman hammams. Some evidence suggests they existed, while others believe steam made such mechanisms too unreliable. Either way, you now have first-hand proof that ducks are not clock-friendly. You finally present a working version. Steam-resistant, duck-proofed, and accurate to within 4 minutes, a miracle in this environment. You deliver it to the bathhouse with a small bow and a polite note, test only after steam reaches level 3. The scheduler sends you a second request, guest wing wake-up timer. You are on a roll. So you begin assembling a collection, 1 model for dry spaces, 1 for steam, 1 for quiet nudges, 1 that plays a song with little metal chimes if the guest is very important and needs a less jarring start. You're not sure when it happened, but at some point, you went from strange wax tinker to official semi-unofficial timekeeping consultant. You still don't have a title. But titles are for people who aren't inventing wooden chickens that crow at dawn, still a work in progress. You even begin tracking the efficiency of your devices. How many seconds off? Did it wake people without complaint? Did the cat flee the room or remain seated? Yes, you have a cat-related accuracy chart now. Your mentor nods approvingly at your data. But he reminds you, accuracy is nice. But meaning is what makes a device valuable. You think about that. Is your alarm clock meaningful? To the scheduler, yes. To the Janissaries, probably not. To the duck, definitely not. But to you? It's becoming more than a machine. It's a conversation with the cosmos, a way to mark the invisible. Time, after all, never stops. Never slows. It slips past your fingers, silent and soft, unless you find a way to catch it, bell by bell, drop by drop. And in the heart of the empire, for the first time, you are the one giving time its voice. Somewhere between cork-floating Hammam clocks and whisper-feather nudgers, you realize something peculiar. You become a kind of timekeeper yourself. Not in the official sense, no turban title, no embroidered robe, no guards announcing your presence, but in that odd, quiet way where people now look to you when something needs to happen on time. The Sultan's cook, for instance, now knocks on your door every Friday. Tea must be steeped exactly 7 minutes, he mutters, handing over a thin parchment with a complicated request involving 3 teapots, a wind-up spoon, and something he calls the sprig timer. You smile. Nod. You've built stranger things. That's how your culinary clock line is born. The sprig timer, as it turns out, is nothing more than a small sand hourglass affixed to a spoon's handle, but the moment you paint it green and tie a sprig of mint to the top, the chef declares it a revolution. You don't tell him the mint is mostly decorative. Mainstream fact? In Ottoman kitchens, especially the imperial ones, timing was everything. Meals weren't just food, they were part of a larger theatrical performance of power. The Sultan's soup had to be at the perfect temperature, and his rice fluffed exactly to imperial softness, or someone was definitely losing a mustache. Soon, the bakers want one too. The rise and shine bell, they call it. A small, heat-sensitive coil that dings once the dough has rested just long enough beside the hearth. You test it by sleeping next to a basket of rising bread. You wake up smelling delicious. The baker is pleased. You're offered a lifetime supply of halva, which you accept immediately, no questions asked. Of course, the moment you start working with food, someone from the medical wing gets wind of it. You built a tea timer for digestion? No. I built a tea timer for not oversteeping. Same thing. They hand you a list. 18 herbs. Each with its own steeping requirement. Each to be delivered to a specific courtier with specific digestive quirks. One has acid reflux. One has nerves. One apparently gets dizzy every time Mercury goes retrograde. You build the herbal hourglass, a 3-chamber device filled with crushed rose petals, each chamber aligned with a small bell tuned to different tones. When a certain amount of time has passed, the petals drop, the bell rings, and the tea is ready to be poured. Fringe tidbit? While modern alarm clocks are often associated with waking people up, earlier iterations, especially in cultures like the Ottoman Empire, were frequently tied to rituals, including prayer, medicine, and food. Time wasn't just measured, it was honored. You even catch them you whack it fiddling with one of your tea bells, trying to reverse engineer it. You say nothing. It's flattering. Sort of. And then, just when you're feeling smug, the astrologer shows up. She's tall, dressed in indigo, smells faintly of ink and moonlight, and she does not knock. You, she says, scanning your workbench with disdain. You're the candle boy? Alarm boy, you correct. Close enough, she mutters. Can you make one that chimes during Venus transitions? You pause. Like actual planetary transitions? Yes. But softly. Define softly. She glares. So softly that only those meant to hear it do. You consider this. Then say, that sounds like it requires magic. Good, she replies. You're halfway there. Historians still argue whether timekeeping in the Ottoman court was truly influenced by astrology or if astrologers merely used celestial events as a political tool. Either way, lunar charts were part of palace life, especially when it came to planting, weddings, and diplomatic visits. Some even claimed the Sultan only signed certain treaties during favorable planetary alignments. You work 3 nights straight on the celestial gong, a silent alarm that releases a single puff of jasmine incense and causes a hidden pebble to roll down a curved wooden path. The sound is barely audible, but the astrologer nods. You'll do, she says, and disappears as mysteriously as she came. By now, your devices are scattered all across the palace. Some still work. Some have been repurposed into curious paperweights. One has been accidentally turned into a soap dish. But most still serve their original purpose, calling attention to time, one tiny clang at a time. People stop you in the corridors now. Can I get a quieter version? Do you make wake-up drums? My cousin needs one that chirps like a sparrow. Your work table becomes a shrine of requests. And somewhere amid the clatter and copper, you sketch out what you call the morning orchestra, a multi-device system designed to rouse the palace floor by floor, using a series of bells, feathers, puffs of scent, and gently rising warmth. The prototype covers your entire sleeping chamber. You test it one morning. First, a bell. Then, a feather. Then, the faint smell of cinnamon. Then a slight warmth under your mat. Then, accidentally, boiling tea. You shriek. The feather singes. The cat flees, again. But you learn something important. simplicity is underrated. So you scale back. Refine. And now, with every tick and hiss and feather flutter, you begin to feel something deeper. This isn't just invention. It's ritual. A rhythm. A heartbeat that belongs not to the gears, but to the lives that move around them. You aren't just building machines anymore, you're becoming part of a daily cycle, a trusted presence just beneath the surface of palace life. And even though most people still don't know your name, they know your sound. Or your silence. And for you, that's enough. For now. You no longer bother brushing the soot from your sleeves. It's your new uniform, badge of honor, really. Half the court has taken to calling you the Bell Whisperer, though a few insist on that odd one with the feather contraptions. Either way, your legacy is becoming as tangled as your workbench, where spoons, sand, wax, incense, and feathers coexist in chaotic harmony. And now, the Sultan's valet comes to you. Which is a problem. He doesn't knock. He just glides into the workshop like he owns the air around him and says, "The Sultan would like a private device. Something elegant, unobtrusive, and not likely to catch on fire." You manage a nod. No wax? No wax? No feathers? The valet grimaces. He hates feathers. This may be your greatest challenge yet, a fireless, featherless, dignified Ottoman alarm clock for the single most important person in the empire. No pressure. You pull out a clean scroll and begin the brainstorming ritual. You pace. You mutter. You spill tea. And then it hits you. Water. Again. But not just dripping into bowls. You remember something from one of your visits to the Muwakkit, a description of ancient clepsydras, water clocks that mark time by the steady flow of water between vessels. Some have floating figurines that move with the level. Mainstream fact? Water clocks date back thousands of years and were used in Islamic empires for everything from prayer scheduling to astronomy. The Ottomans inherited and refined these systems, sometimes adding elaborate decorations or automata that emerged to mark the hour. You spend the next 5 days crafting what you call the Sultan's Stream. It's housed in a narrow wooden tower, lacquered in deep green and gold. Inside, 2 chambers connect by a copper funnel. A float rises slowly with the water level, and when it reaches the top, it pushes a lever that triggers a soft chime. Not a bell. Not a clang. Just a whisper of a tone, like glass brushing silk. It is, in your humble opinion, perfect. You test it 13 times. It never fails. You even place a rose petal on the float. When the alarm goes off, it lifts, flutters gently down, and lands on your wrist. You nearly cry from how beautiful it is. You deliver it with shaking hands. The valet inspects every inch. Sniffs it. Why? Taps it once. Nods. Acceptable. Acceptable? You internally scream. But a week later, you overhear the Janissaries whispering. The Sultan wakes earlier now. Seems calmer. His tea is always still warm. You smile. Rose petals and all. Fringe tidbit? There are scattered, strange stories from palace lore about a sultan who woke each day not to servants or roosters, but to a glass bird that chimed softly near his bed. No actual bird ever appears in the records, but maybe, just maybe, that whisper chime lives on. Now that your device has entered the Sultan's orbit, others want in. The royal librarian requests a time signal to mark quiet reading hours. Nothing too sudden, she says, or the scrolls curl in fear. You give her a scent clock. Every hour, a drop of jasmine oil falls onto a hot stone, releasing a soft floral note. She claims the scrolls seem less tense. You're not sure scrolls can be tense, but you nod anyway. Then comes the palace astronomer. I need a timer that operates in the dark, he says, adjusting 3 monocles at once. Light ruins the charts. You build him the night gong, a device with a sand counterweight and a whisper spring that emits a soft click when time passes. He loves it. You have no idea how he hears it over the sound of his own wheezing. Next, the kitchen herbalist wants a humidity alarm for drying herbs. When the room reaches 60%, she says, something must pop. You give her a spring-loaded fig. Don't ask how. It works. But even as your devices grow more inventive, something is shifting. You start to notice the wear in your tools. The grooves in your desk where your elbow always rests. The way the bells, once a novelty, now feel like trusted companions. You name one of them Ahmed. He's the reliable one. Historians still argue whether inventors in court workshops had true creative freedom or if they operated strictly under direction. The truth, it seems, is both. The empire needed function, but it also quietly craved wonder. And your inventions sit right at that intersection, half reliable, half ridiculous. All yours. One afternoon, the Muwakkit invites you back to the observatory wing. Not for correction this time, but for conversation. You've built a little empire, he says, gesturing at your diagrams. You shrug. I just wanted to wake up on time. And now the Sultan drinks warm tea. That's more than most can say. You sit in silence for a while, watching the sun pass through stained glass. Time, visible in fragments. He offers you a plum. You decline. Palace plums are a trap, 1 in 5 is fermented. Then he says it. Ever thought of building a time fountain? You blink. Like, a fountain that tells time? He nods. We used to have one. Gone now. You could try. The idea consumes you. A time fountain. Water rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Maybe even lighting small lanterns as it flows. A symphony of liquid and flame. Silent, elegant. The kind of thing that doesn't just tell time, it honors it. You return to your bench and begin sketching. Diagrams fill your scrolls, cascading basins, pressure levers, wax-wrapped nozzles, flame-proof valves. You're no longer building clocks for people. You're building one for the palace itself. Because time, in its quiet way, has made a place for you here. Not just as an inventor, but as a listener. A translator of minutes. A keeper of the invisible. You build in silence now, not because you have to, but because it's starting to feel sacred. The workshop, once a chaotic mess of wax strips and copper shavings, has taken on the hush of a prayer hall. Even the cat treads more carefully. Well, unless there's fish involved. Then all bets are off. The time fountain begins as a sketch. Then a model. Then a series of failures so spectacular, the Janissaries ask if you're experimenting with military devices. You aren't, but you're flattered. You build bowl upon bowl, each feeding into the next. A single trickle of water flows from the topmost cup, regulated by a hidden siphon, cascading downward with time precision. At the base, a weighted cup tips slowly after each hour, nudging a lever, which releases a whisper chime, or, depending on the model, a pedal, a puff of steam, or a drifting cork shaped like a boat. The early versions are poetic but utterly useless. One floods the workshop. Another catches mold. A third tips too early and sprays the visiting head of sanitation with rosemary-scented mist. He's not amused. But eventually, the fourth version works. Not just functions, it sings. A soft bell rings precisely on the hour. The water flows in measured serenity. Even the cat curls up beside it, as if acknowledging its cosmic authority. You don't bother asking permission this time. You simply install it, quietly, confidently, at the entrance to the garden courtyard. A place where no one needs to check the time, but where everyone will still feel it pass. Mainstream fact? Gardens were central to Ottoman court life, places of reflection, beauty, and symbolism. Timekeeping here wasn't about discipline, it was about harmony. Many scholars suggest that fountains in Islamic architecture weren't just decorative, they were spatial expressions of divine rhythm. Soon, visitors pause by your fountain. Some bow their heads. Some time their tea breaks by the soft bells. One passing poet simply says, "Ah," and walks on, his eyes shining. You've never felt prouder. But the moment doesn't last. Because one morning, a courier arrives. A scroll. Gold seal. The Sultan's signature. You nearly drop it. You unroll it carefully, expecting either doom or exile, or possibly a polite request to invent a nose flute timer. Instead, it reads, "We request a portable version. For travel. Reliable. Discreet." Your eyes widen. The Sultan wants a travel alarm clock. Fringe tidbit? The Ottoman court traveled often, especially during campaigns or seasonal shifts. A mobile palace called the Cr Ortega included tents more lavish than most buildings. Timekeeping was crucial during these journeys, from coordinating prayers to military drills. So, how do you shrink a time fountain? You don't. You start over. You sketch by candlelight, a compact brass box. No water. No wax. Just gearwork. Coils. Springs. You study European pocket watches, recently imported through Venice. You dissect one, then build something better. Or, at least, different. This one doesn't tick. It clicks, softly. Inside is a coiled spring that drives a series of rotating pins. At the set time, a pin strikes a thin metal tongue, ting. It's nearly silent. But to a trained ear, it's unmistakable. You call it the hour whisperer. You test it by placing it under your mat and lying perfectly still. The moment it chimes, you wake. Just as you trained yourself. Just as you promised. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans developed spring-driven travel clocks independently or relied solely on imports. Some surviving examples suggest hybrid models, Ottoman design with European inner workings. Yours? Pure invention. A creature of East and West, old and new, soft and stubborn. You present it in a small velvet pouch. The valet takes it, tests it, and nods. It will travel, he says simply, then vanishes behind a carved door. You sit there, staring at the empty pouch in your lap, half relieved, half sad. It's like sending your child off into the world, only this child is made of brass and won't write home. Your workshop gets quiet again. Too quiet. You begin another sketch. Not because anyone asked, but because you're curious. This one isn't for waking. It's for remembering. A device that rings not to tell you what to do, but to ask why. You design a slow timer, one that rings once every 99 days. No one needs it. But it matters. It's your gift to yourself. A way to say, you were here. You made something. It ticked. The bell on it is tuned to the lowest note you could find. Barely audible. A hum more than a sound. Like a thought forming. Or a goodbye whispered into a pillow. You place it beside the time fountain. No one notices. Except the cat. He sits beside it every day now. Waiting. Maybe for the next chime. Or maybe just for the sunbeam that hits the fountain at precisely 10:03. Either way, he knows. And so do you. That time, the invisible, impatient guest, now moves to your rhythm. The palace has grown used to your presence, the way ivy quietly wraps itself around old stone. You're no longer just that inventor, you're the inventor. The unofficial steward of time, humming softly in the background of empire, barely seen but deeply felt. And now, the call comes again, not from a valet or scribe or astronomer, but from the imperial musician. You weren't expecting this. He stands in your doorway, his robe a parade of silks, his mustache so finely waxed it could double as a metronome. We wish to conduct an experiment, he says, bowing slightly. A clock, that plays music. You blink. Then nod, slowly. Of course you do. He hands you a sketch. It's abstract. Swirls and notes and arrows pointing nowhere. You flip it upside down. It makes less sense. Still, something stirs inside you. A melody that isn't quite music. A rhythm of invention. So begins your next project, the melodic timekeeper. Your idea? A rotating drum with small pins that strike tuned metal bars, like a music box, but governed by an internal timer. Mainstream fact? The earliest programmable musical instruments included devices like barrel organs and carillons, which used pin cylinders to control timing and notes. Some even argue these were precursors to modern computing. You gather chimes, bells, and even a few borrowed oud strings. You test note after note, tuning them with the obsessive care of a paranoid birdwatcher. Eventually, you land on something simple, soft, and just slightly whimsical. The clock is roughly the size of a pumpkin. It chimes every hour on the half, a three-note tune, barely more than a sigh, followed by a delicate ting from a wreathed-in bar of silver. You name the piece whispers for noon. The imperial musician listens with arms folded. Then, without a word, he sits beside the device for an hour, letting it chime twice. Finally, he rises. Yes, he says. Time can sing. He requests 6 more. You're both thrilled and overwhelmed. But that's nothing new. Fringe tidbit? Some musicians in Ottoman courts were trained not only in instruments but also in timing theory, understanding the space between notes, the rhythm of rituals, and even aligning performances with celestial events. To them, a musical clock wouldn't seem strange. It would seem necessary. Now the clocks are no longer about waking, or boiling tea, or marking prayers. They're about mood. Atmosphere. You begin crafting a twilight chime that sounds like a sighing reed in the wind. You attach faint bells to drifting incense coils that trigger as the room darkens. You experiment with a whisper paddle that flaps gently in the breeze to time moments of silence. You're no longer a mirror maker. You're a composer of stillness. And then, one evening, you're summoned, not to a workshop, but to the royal terrace. There's wine. Silk cushions. Lamps flickering like nervous stars. You sit cross-legged before the Sultan himself. He says nothing for a long while. Then, why clocks? You hesitate. Then answer honestly. Because time slips away unless you tie it down. He chuckles. And have you tied it down? You gesture toward the courtyard. It paces itself now. He nods, seeming pleased. I used your traveler's clock on our last journey. It woke me with a ting and a sense of purpose. That might be the highest compliment you'll ever receive. He leans forward, eyes alight. So tell me, what would you build if no one asked? That question stuns you. Because you have an answer. A clock for the end of day. A device not to wake, not to warn, but to release. Something soft. Gentle. A signal that tells the room, it's over. You've done enough. Let go now. He waits. You describe it, a suspended hourglass that turns itself at dusk, the final grains of sand releasing a chime so faint only the calmest can hear it. It triggers a lantern that glows with just enough warmth to comfort but not disturb. A last breath of rosewater scent curls through the air. It marks not the end, but the soft unfurling of rest. The Sultan closes his eyes. Yes, he whispers. Build that. So you do. Historians still argue whether there ever was a so-called sunset clock in the Ottoman court, designed not for function but for grace. One record speaks of a chamber where rest arrived not through decree, but through atmosphere, a room that exhaled serenity. You finish your sunset clock in a week. And when it chimes for the first time, just as the last rays of gold leave the marble floor, you feel something ease inside your ribs. You've given sleep its own ceremony. And the empire, perhaps without knowing it, has followed you there. The workshop door stays open now. People wander in not to demand, but to ask gently, is it nearly dusk, or may I hear the lavender one again? The cat still doesn't care. But the rhythm continues. Bell by bell. Sigh by sigh. The empire grows quieter. Not in weakness, but in peace. And you, the bell whisperer, mark its breath. You begin to notice it in the smallest things now, the rhythm. Not just of your devices, but of the palace itself. Servants walking in measured paces. The scribe unrolling scrolls with deliberate grace. Even the laundry flapping on the line seems to fold in time with some invisible beat. Your beat, maybe. Or perhaps you've just been surrounded by too many ticking things. Either way, your clocks have changed the court. And now, a letter arrives, delivered not by a valet or a musician, but by a gardener. Wrinkled hands, dirt under the fingernails, eyes like someone who's spent too long watching lilies bloom and fade. She wants a clock for the roses, he says simply. You blink. Excuse me? The chief gardener. The roses. Their timing. She wants it captured. Of course she does. You follow him to the palace gardens, where ancient rosebushes twist in patient majesty, each bloom timed not by ticking but by sunlight, soil, and stubborn will. You take notes. Study patterns. Count petals. Speak to bees. Then you build what you call the blossom meter. It's less of a clock, more of a sunlight-sensitive gong, hidden in a carved wooden lantern. As dawn stretches across the garden, it triggers a series of faint tings, each aligned with a flower's opening. It doesn't wake anyone. But it marks something. A moment no one would otherwise notice. Mainstream fact? The Ottoman Empire's royal gardens weren't merely decorative, they were sacred, symbolic spaces. Flowers, especially tulips and roses, carried cultural and even political meaning. Some records indicate they were so precisely cultivated that their blooming times were planned to coincide with festivals and visits. The gardener listens to your idea and nods only once. You consider that high praise. You leave the lantern in the garden, half buried under climbing jasmine. By the next week, someone has written a poem about it. By the next month, someone tries to steal it. Flattering, really. But now a new problem arises. Your clocks are too beloved. The imperial archivist comes knocking, literally, 3 times, each with increasing volume. Your devices must be documented. You look up from your sketches. Documented how? Drawings. Names. Materials. Instructions. We can't have the next generation guessing how to reheat tea without feathers. You chuckle, then pause. Because she's right. So begins your least glamorous task, the cataloging of time. You start by organizing your workshop. Tools in one drawer, chimes in another. Scrolls stacked by usefulness, and the utterly deranged ones marked with little doodles of confused ducks. Those are the ones with experimental wax coils that screamed instead of chimed. We don't talk about them. You create a codex. Each device gets a page. You sketch diagrams. List trigger mechanisms. Include notes like "do not use near cats" or "never set this to ring before coffee." You title it modestly. A personal compendium of subtle mechanisms and other clockly curiosities. Fringe tidbit? Ottoman inventors often kept detailed notebooks, many of which survive today, filled with ingenious designs and cryptic annotations. Some combine engineering with poetry, others read like to-do lists with gears. You realize you're part of a long, ticking lineage. And as you write, you remember every failure. Every soggy floorboard. Every startled janissary. Every feather that floated a little too close to a flame. You include them all. Failures are part of the rhythm too. The archivist returns. Reads your work. Blinks once. This is excessive. You beam. Thank you. Then, as if the universe senses your contentment, someone bursts into your workshop with fresh panic. It's a palace nurse. She's holding a squirming child wrapped in linen. "We need a lullaby clock," she blurts. "For the nursery. No bells. No metal. And definitely no feathers. Something that rocks. Maybe sings. Also, waterproof." You raise an eyebrow. What exactly happens in that nursery? She just shrugs and hands you a list. You build what you call the cradle clock, a tiny wooden turtle whose shell slowly rocks back and forth on a curved base. Hidden inside, a reed mechanism that hums a low, breathy tune when tipped just right. No springs. No wax. Just gravity and kindness. You deliver it in person. The baby stops crying. You consider retiring on the spot. Historians still argue whether musical automata made it into Ottoman nurseries or if such devices were confined to adult spaces. There are, however, references to soothing mechanisms, rocking cradles attached to pulleys, or even servants assigned to tap soft rhythms all night long. You prefer the turtle. Quiet. Consistent. Not paid in raisins. The workshop grows quieter as autumn settles in. Your hours stretch, not because of work, but because time feels slower now. You hear your clocks more. The garden lantern. The sunset whisper. The tea bell. Even the misfiring fig timer in the kitchen, still too enthusiastic. Each is a note in your palace symphony. And then, one foggy morning, the muwakkil arrives again. Not with critique, but with a gift. It's a book of prayers, each chapter aligned with a different hour of the day. Not a requirement, he says. Just a curiosity. A reminder that for some, time is devotion. A rhythm between the body and something larger. You thank him and place it beside your fountain. Later that night, as the clock strikes something unspecific, You sip lukewarm tea and flip through the pages. The prayers are simple. The timing isn't strict. But you follow them anyway. Because even a bell whisperer needs something to listen to. And perhaps, after all this time, that's the point. To live in tune. To chime at the right moment. To let go when the water stills. A hush seems to settle over the palace now, not the tense, waiting kind, but the hush of something complete. The kind of silence that follows the last page of a well-loved book or the final ring of a bell that's done its job. You feel it as you tidy your workbench. The tools, once scattered like a child's puzzle, now lie in neat rows. The chimes are dusted. The water bowls gleam faintly in the lantern light. Even the wax seems to drip more politely these days. You're not finished, not yet, but the arc of your story is curving toward stillness. Then the unexpected arrives, as it always does. A foreign diplomat from Venice, draped in velvet and carrying a feathered hat that offends you on a molecular level, is granted a private tour of the palace. He sees your time fountain. Stops. Tilts his head. And says, "But where's the dial?" You blink. What dial? You know, numbers. Hands. The usual. You grin. Oh, we don't really do hands. He laughs nervously. But how do you tell the time? You lean in. We feel it. Mainstream fact? The Ottomans, especially in the 17th century, placed less emphasis on clock faces and more on cyclical rhythm, prayer times, celestial observation, ritual. The modern obsession with precise hours was a more European import. The Venetian smiles but clearly doesn't get it. Still, that doesn't stop him from requesting a souvenir. Something portable. Symbolic. You know, for my patron's desk. You offer him a feather timer. He declines. So instead, you craft a moonshadow hourglass, a long glass tube that tilts ever so slightly throughout the day, aligning a floating silver bead with carved lunar phases on the base. It's slow. Impractical. Beautiful. He loves it. And suddenly, you are famous in Venice. Apparently, he gifts it to a noble woman who claims it improves digestion. You receive a thank you note scrawled on the back of a wine menu. Still counts. Requests start trickling in. From Persia, someone wants a chime that echoes, but only twice. From Cairo, a timepiece that releases a grain of salt every hour. From Paris, something interpretive? You build some. Ignore others. You start choosing your projects not by urgency, but by tone. Does it sound soft? Does it carry quiet wonder? Would the cat sit beside it? Your newest invention is barely functional, a delicate coil of brass and silk that turns with the draft of passing footsteps. It doesn't chime. It merely moves. You name it the breath clock. No one asks for it. But people visit your workshop to watch it. Fringe tidbit? There are written accounts of movement sculptures within Ottoman courts, objects that serve no clear function but mimic nature, like trees that shook or fans that spun with wind. Some were powered by water pressure, others by mystery. And now your workshop is becoming something else entirely. Not a lab. Not a forge. More like a chapel of rhythm. Visitors bring tea. Ask nothing. Just sit and listen. Sometimes you speak. Sometimes you don't. You start to think the clocks are no longer keeping time. They're protecting it. Encasing it in bells, scents, shadows. Reminding everyone not that the hour has come, but that it exists at all. One evening, a young apprentice shows up at your door. She's barely taller than your workbench. Eyes wide. No introduction. She simply says, "Can I see the time fountain?" You lead her to the courtyard. She watches it flow. Sits silently for 20 minutes. Then, "I want to build one too." And just like that, the clock begins again. Historians still argue whether court inventors trained successors or hoarded their secrets. Few records survive. But one obscure scroll references a woman who carried the breath of the bells from palace to port. No name. Just a whisper. You begin to teach. Quietly. Slowly. You show her the tools. The sketches. The fig timer. She laughs. You tell her about the fountain, and the whisper bell, and the wax coil that once exploded into a pile of startled peacock feathers. She asks why feathers. You shrug. They felt hopeful. Together, you restore older pieces. You fix the set clock for the librarian. Recalibrate the cradle turtle, apparently the baby has learned to kick. You even revisit the incense chimes, tweaking the trigger to make them softer, slower. The apprentice invents her own creation, a sandalwood dropper that taps rhythmically against a tiny wooden xylophone. It's absurd. It's lovely. You hang it above your desk. The palace sleeps easier these days. Not because of your clocks, but maybe because they were invited to rest. Like time itself was given permission to stop rushing. One final request comes, written in precise hand on blue parchment. It's from the Sultan. "I would like one last device." Your heart skips. He writes, "A clock that does not wake. A clock that does not mark. A clock that simply listens." You don't know what that means. But you start anyway. A small, round bowl of smooth obsidian. No gears. No flame. Just a single bead of water, suspended from a thread, that sways ever so slightly with sound. You place it in a silent room. You enter. Say nothing. The bead moves. You smile. You call it the ear of time. The Sultan never comments. But the room is never empty. You no longer build with urgency. You build like the moon waxes, with patience and cycles, and with a quiet certainty that time will bring things back around. The apprentice takes on more now. She tunes the whisper bells with your ear. She oils the breath coil, which has become delightfully squeaky in its old age. She even scolds the cat once for pawing at the time fountain's top bowl. He ignores her, of course. But it's clear, the rhythm has passed to new hands. Still, your fingers remember. You begin a last device. No one's asked for it. It isn't a clock. Not exactly. It's a keeper. A tall, slender glass pillar, filled with sand so fine it moves like smoke. Inside, small copper leaves sway slowly as the grains shift beneath them. At dawn, a faint golden thread of light refracts through the column, casting leaf-shaped shadows across your wall. It does nothing practical. No chime. No measure. But it reminds you of wind, and trees, and the days you once counted by failures. You name it the rememberer. The apprentice watches you finish it, quietly. "Who's it for?" she finally asks. You smile. Anyone who forgets they lived. Mainstream fact? In Ottoman culture, remembrance was an art woven into architecture, poetry, even food. The past wasn't discarded, it was honored. Sometimes, even the simplest object, a faded tile, a soft echo, was meant to remind. You place the rememberer in your window. And it begins its work. soft shadows, slower breaths. You look around your workshop and realize it's not a workshop anymore. It's a clock. The whole space. The whole palace, really. Every corridor and carpet, every breeze-drifted curtain and soft-footed servant, each moving according to a strange, serene internal order. You helped make that. Fringe tidbit? There are letters, one especially strange, from a visiting English merchant who describes Topkapi Palace as a beast of breath and silk, where time drips in quiet bells and the walls seem to sleep and wake. You don't correct him. He's not wrong. It's time now. Not to stop, but to fade. You pass the final sketches to the apprentice. She adds notes in the margins. Too loud, try felt lining. What if it whispers instead of rings? You nod. Good. She's already better than you. One evening, you find yourself at the time fountain, a fig in your hand, the cat on your lap. The sun is curling down behind the domes, and the fountain gives its faintest pling, a drop marking the final light. You smile. And remember that first week, the chaos, the spilled wax, the arguments with the astronomer over whether moonlight affected chime tone. It didn't. But you still argue, just to keep it interesting. Historians still argue whether your clocks shaped court life or simply followed it. Some claim you revolutionized imperial timekeeping. Others think your devices were charming distractions. There's probably truth in both. But what matters is this. You built a different rhythm. One not measured in seconds or decrees, but in breaths. And someone else will carry that forward now. You stand. Stretch. The apprentice waves from the garden. The fountain plings again. Time keeps going, but gentler now. And as night folds over the domes and rooftops, the clocks begin their quiet lullaby, not to wake, not to warn, but to let go. To say, you've done enough today. Let yourself drift. Let yourself rest. Let the hours roll without counting. You are no longer the bell ringer. You are the one who listens. The palace hums with sleep. And so do you. And now, as the final echoes of the time fountain dissolve into night, you feel it, a settling. A stillness that is not empty, but full. Full of everything you built, everything you repaired, and everything you allowed to be quiet. The workshop no longer needs you. The apprentice carries the rhythm. The clocks no longer ask questions. They simply tick, or breathe, or sigh, or shimmer. You step through the darkened palace, soft-footed on rugs woven centuries ago, each one a pattern of repetition and rest. You move not with purpose now, but with permission. Time does not push. It walks beside you. Somewhere behind you, the whisper bell hums its note. Somewhere ahead, a jasmine-scented chime counts the stars. And overhead, the domes are asleep. Even the moon seems slower tonight. You lie down, not because the hour demands it, but because the hour allows it. Your breath syncs with the remembered rhythms, a gentle plink, a feather's fall, a reed's low whisper. Each sound not a summons, but a soft letting go. And as you drift, whether in a palace or in your room, in Istanbul or Indiana, you carry it with you. That sense of unhurried time. That kindness of rhythm. There's no more need to check the clock. You are the clock. Tick. Tock. Sleep.